continuing with Daniel. And it's an interesting book because, like I said, 6 chapters are all history. The next 6 chapters are prophecy. And both groups have been gone through very well in the church because we enjoy the stories. You know, you can't be a kid without hearing about Daniel and the lion's den. And we're going to do one today, the fiery furnace. So the idea is that, again, chapter 1 is establishment of an introduction and all about Daniel and his friends and how they came to be. Chapter 2 is him appearing before the king and did that metal man. Remember where Nebuchadnezzar had the dream that he saw this giant figure that had a head of gold, had a chest of silver, loins of bronze, iron legs, and then feet with iron mixed with clay. A giant mountain of boulder came and hit it and knocked it into dust. Just completely ground it up to nothing. And then that mountain became this great tree that took over the whole world. That's going to be what we know. Well, that's going to be what we've seen in Ezekiel. And so that's going to be. Chapter 1 and 2 are about Daniel. Chapter 3 and 4 about Nebuchadnezzar. And then 5 and 6 go back to Daniel. And then we start looking at prophecies. So we have 2 stories at the beginning, 2 stories in the middle somewhere. We don't know exactly where. And 2 stories at the end. So in the middle, Nebuchadnezzar, he made this image of gold. And the height was 60 cubits, which was 120 feet, which was like a 6-story building, basically. But he only made it about 12 feet. It's the size of your average room. So this thing was tall and skinny and made of gold. And you get the idea that it had embroidery on it and all kinds of different things on it to be worshipped. Probably sayings and maybe pictures of battles, or I don't know. It doesn't really say in here. But it was an image of gold. It wasn't just, you know, a giant obelisk or something like the Washington Monument. And he put this in the plains of Duran in the province of Babylon. So it was out in the plains where everybody could see it. And he gave a decree to all the captains and judges and treasurers and counselors and sheriffs and rulers of the province. They came to dedicate the imagery. And he set it up to where when you hear the music, when you hear music playing, when you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, you know, the psalter, the dulcimer, all these, you will come and worship this image that he set up. And you're going to fall down before it and worship. And we know the story here. He sets this thing up. At the sound of the music, everybody's supposed to drop and worship. Well, some of the Jews don't. Especially, we have Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They do not drop. Now, I know Daniel, maybe he was gone or something when this happened. He's not mentioned here. But his friends are. And the other people say that these Jews are not obeying. And you told them that this is what they should do. So certain it says there are certain Jews which you have set over the altars of the prophets in Babylon, and they regard not to serve thy gods, nor worship the golden idol. So he calls them in. At first it seems like he talks nicely to them, but they say that they're not going to do it. They're not going to worship this God, and then he turns on them. And so he creates this fiery furnace, and he's going to throw them in it. And they go, and they don't say, well, our God's going to get us out of it. They didn't know that. They said that if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the image which you've set up. Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and his visage changed. See, that's why I get that he was speaking good to them, and then he turned around and spoke ill of them. So he goes, and he creates this furnace, and he wants to make it even hotter. He makes it hotter, and he wraps them up in things that'll burn. He wraps them up in their clothing. He wraps them up in hats. I mean, so that they will just catch fire as soon as they go in there. In fact, the men were bound in their coats and their hosen and their hats and other garments, and he made the fire really hot that it slew the men who took them to the furnace. It was so hot that when the men went to throw them in, they were burned and killed. So that's a pretty hot furnace. And he says to his magicians, though, he goes, wait, we threw 3 men in there, but I see 4. I see another person in there, and it's like the Son of God. So there's a bright person in there. And maybe, you know, this visage was different. It wasn't just 3 people, but the other one. Remember, when Ezekiel saw this person that was fiery up above and was like brass in below his loins. Maybe he saw something like that, but it looked different. It looked like an angelic being. He called it a son of God. And the princes and the captains and all of them, they saw these men. They all saw it. It wasn't just one person who saw this. They saw it too. And he brings them out. And they didn't even smell of smoke. Their hair wasn't singed. They were fine. And he goes, I make a decree that in every nation and language and tongues that speak anything amiss against the God of, he calls him Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be cut into pieces, and their houses shall be a dunghill. So he flips the script. You know, remember we've heard that before, that if you don't do this, that's going to happen to you. And so when he was dealing with the magicians in chapter 2, if you don't tell me this, I'm going to kill you and turn your houses into a dunghill. Anyone who speaks against this guy, he's going to do that to them. And he promoted these guys in the province. So it's a good story. We've heard it. Many of us heard it before, but it's good to see again. In chapter 4 is basically a letter. It's not basically. It is a letter from Nebuchadnezzar himself. He tells the story. It's his testimony of what happened to him. And he begins, Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. So here you've got this king who's beginning this preamble. We'll see this later on when people wrote letters. They wrote letters like this. Pauline letters were written like this. So he goes and he talks about, I wanted to show you signs and wonders that the high God has wrought towards me. How great are his signs. And he talks about how he was in his palace, and he has this dream, and it's a troubling dream, and it wasn't the Metal Man dream, but this was a different dream. And they troubled me, and then came in the magicians and the astrologers, and they couldn't do anything about it. And last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belshazzar. And he goes, O Belshazzar, master of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. He tells him this vision that was in his head. And there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height was great, and the tree grew strong, and it reached up to heaven. And the leaves there were fair, and the fruit was good. But I saw in the vision, when I was in my bed, and that there was a watcher. They consider that like an angel. A watcher went and said, hew down the tree and cut off the branches, shake off the leaves, scatter its fruit, let the beast get away under it, and the fowls upon its branches. But leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of irons and brass, and in the tender grass, and let it be wet with the dew of heavens. Let his heart be changed from man's into a beast heart. It was given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. 7 years, 7 times. He tells this to Daniel. And this matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones. So he dreamt this dream, and Daniel was astonished for an hour when he heard it. He took some time by himself to figure it out. He didn't just blur it out. You know, he stopped to meditate and think and pray upon what he was seeing. And so he gives him this dream, and he goes, it is for thou, O king, because you become strong. But the watchers and the holy ones have come down from heaven and said, hew down the stone. This is the interpretation. They're going to drive you out from men, and thy dwelling place shall be with the beasts of the field, and shall make you eat grass as oxen, and you shall be wet there with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whoever he wills. He wanted Nebuchadnezzar to know that he needs to know that there's a God in heaven. So he hears this, and it's like he's going to become this beast for 7 years, and then he's going to come back. And so what happened was Nebuchadnezzar knew this, but 12 months later, a year later, he's looking over his kingdom, and he goes, is this not great Babylon, which I have built for the house of the kingdom of the might of my power? He was taking, credit for all the things that he had, and he wasn't giving credit to God. And while it was still in his mouth, that happened to him, and he became this. And he was driven out from men, and he stayed there for 7 years. Some people speculate that Daniel would have taken care of him, or maybe some of the other people. But yeah, he was out with them. O King Nebuchadnezzar, as he has spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, And they'll drive thee out from men, and your dwelling place will be with the beasts of the field. 7 times shall pass over you. And that same hour was the thing fulfilled, Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and ate grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven. His hair had grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails were like bird's claws. He was out with the beast, this high person over all the provinces. And yet now he's down with the beast. And at the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that lived forevermore, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion. And all the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. And he does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol the honor of the King of heaven. So we have this story where this wonderful mighty king was taken down and then lifted up. So those are beautiful stories. We know them pretty well. Tomorrow we'll look at the story of Belshazzar. Actually, yeah, we'll look at Belshazzar tomorrow. And then we finish off chapter 6 with the history of Darius. But then we get into the interpretations. So this book is wonderful. We know it very well. But let's glean through it and see the wonderful things that God has done. Thank you.